Contact? All right. Okay. So in front of you, you can see this. You can't tell how bad this code is yet because you can only see part of it. But this is some ancient stuff. I went out and dug up the worst page I could find from a 2004 project. And my intention here is to show how to move from page-oriented, or what I call page-oriented PHP, into a more modern framework-driven and object-oriented styles of development. So you can see a lot of this is code that's doing validation right here, and it's all in this one page. There's SQL embedded in here. Scrolling on, there was some authentication stuff up at the very top. And if we get down here far enough, we're actually going to get into HTML. It's all in the same page. So this is what I call page-oriented. It's all right there in one place, and it skips back and forth. There's probably some of those PHP. Yeah, here's some PHP that's embedded right within the HTML. So we've all seen this kind of code, and we all hate it, I'm sure. And we'd all rather be doing something more structured. But we frequently have people who come to these meetings and are faced with migrating something like this into a modern framework. So this is the first presentation. We're going to try to re-engineer or refactor this code into something a little more maintainable. Now, the first thing I would suggest on doing this, everybody probably has their own way of doing this, but I would suggest looking at an ORM, first of all. I love to have an ORM, an object relational mapper, to handle the database interaction. That gets me an object-oriented interface to a relational structure, right? So everything within the PHP code still looks like an object, but it can store things over on the database in relational formats. So, and then on top of that, I think one of the best things to have right off the bat is a repository where you can take queries, SQL queries like these, copy those off into another object, and you can just talk to that object and say, give me all of those classified, this is dealing with classified ads, so give me all the classified ads that have this criterion. So, and then that object would be responsible for establishing connections to whatever data store it wants to use, whether that's a simple array structure in memory or NoSQL database of some sort or a relational database. And at that point, the code doesn't care. This code would not care what the storage mechanism is, or it would not care that there's SQL out there someplace embedded in another object. It may be there and it may not, but this code would operate the same regardless of how things are stored. And that kind of gives you the equivalent of the ORM model, but at a collection level. So you would have a repository that, a separate repository for each entity in your data model. So if you look at your ORM structure, you'd have models that, you'd have a model for classified ads, you'd have a model for users. I don't see what else is in here, just classified ads right now, but, and then you would have, pardon me, you would have a repository also for classified ads. So you would create the classified ad model and then turn to the repository and say, save this or delete it or whatever operation you need to do on those. Give me a whole list of these. The repository would be the collection of all of your classified ads. Okay. I have some other code here if I can pull it up. Let me see if I can get all of these to open at one time, doing this with one hand. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so here this file would contain a classified ad repository, and I misnamed it. I named it classified repository, but classified ad repository. And it should extend a base repository, and the base repository is really implementing the contract in the abstract, some kind of abstract repository. Now, I've copied some code here from another project so you can see maybe what a repository should be able to do. This is from a Laravel project, so there's Eloquent code in here. And so this one's heavily influenced by Eloquent, but you could do similar things with other ORMs. Eloquent is the ORM for Laravel. Right. So here's a function that's get new, and all it does is establish a clean copy of the model. There's a function that retrieves all of the models in that database. So this one would retrieve all of the classified ads in the database. And then you would need several functions to find different collections, to filter that list of all the classified ads in the repository or in the database. All right? We could look more at that if anyone's interested, but let's just start here. And again, typing with one hand, sorry. PHP Storm helping me out there. So this would extend the base. I can't find my delete key on this keyboard. Yeah, thanks. All right, thanks. Okay, that's why it's not doing it, because PHP Storm is not showing me because I'm trying to extend the wrong class. I apologize for my typing. Okay. So just to kind of give the idea here, I would want to take this piece of code here and move that to the repository and just give it a functional name. I don't really know what the name would be right now. But okay, so there's the SQL over in the repository, and this would have to have some other code around it to make it work, obviously. But now over in this part of the code, we can take that stuff out and replace it with a really simple call to a repository. I think that I'm not in a class here, so let's just assume that the repository has been instantiated as a classified repo. This keyboard is killing me. Okay. So we continue working through the code and isolating the SQL that way. And then, of course, have to make the classified add or the classified repo function. So somewhere in the abstract implementation, we would have to have it connect to PDO and log us into the database. We'd store the credentials somewhere in the environment and pull it out of there. And so this would do all of the basic footwork for getting us connected to the database and executing that query, doing binding variables, all that sort of thing. All right? So
you'd have to define email and such as a
yeah.
function, or is the global variable taken all the way through to the class?
Yeah, those things are probably going to have to be passed in, maybe here. Like that. Yeah, I think that's the only one that it's passing here, right? A lot of this other stuff, see, then it's going to come out like anything dealing with the database. You can see PHP Storm has highlighted this, has scratched through the MySQL Select DB because that's deprecated now on the version of PHP that I'm using here. But all of that stuff is going to eventually come out of this code and get hidden away behind the repository. This statement too would come out and would be just it would be just get the find all ads for nobody, and we just pass nobody in. So my intention is to keep working with this code, and I'll bring it back next time cleaned up, and we can talk about it a little more then. and we can do a side-by-side comparison, do the diff with PHP Storm. It'll show what was in the code and what is still there and what replaced it. All right, so that's homework for me. The other possible pattern I wanted to talk about here was just the service pattern. I'm not sure it's actually a pattern. It might be just a maybe service layer is the pattern or something. But there would be things within this that we can isolate into another file altogether, another object. So we might take all of this block of code here that's, if I knew what this was actually doing, it might help. But I can identify, say, this validation stuff. We might take all of that and push that off to another service that's just doing validation. Right? There are lots of classes out there that do validation. I'd probably choose to install one of those for this project. So if we did that, then we'd be taking a lot of this code, like from here all the way through all of that validation, and bounce that off to another class altogether. Right, all the way down through here, and then say, this class, validate, and if it's valid, then we'll come back here. Possibly we would do that in the model. We could also do that within the repository. Depends on some other design decisions. Right. Okay. Not very organized, but do you have any questions or any questions about repository? I don't think I explained that real well. Do any of you use repositories as a design pattern? Yeah, how would you explain it, Alex? If I could put you on the spot.
Basically, an interface with the database. You get the repository that's with a bunch of models.
Uh-huh.
And then you have the database, and then you have the repository. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the database, and then you have the repository. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repository, and then you have the database. And then you have the repos
an interface to the database. But
basically, yeah, you can make the camera provide implementation for the interface. And then basically about abstract out the database data. So if you have your own migrate to a different database down the road, you can retain the same interface, but you provide a different implementation for the repository.
right. Right, it abstracts out the collection aspect of the database. So this this code right here would eventually return some kind of collection. So instead of dealing with a MySQL query and doing, trying to determine when you hit the end of the query and all of that, you would get a collection back that would be an iterable. Probably in any language you have iterables. So. And then this, again, the repository can be completely agnostic of the database. It doesn't have to know what the database is. It doesn't have to contain SQL. Obviously, if you were using a NoSQL database, you wouldn't have SQL, right? So we looked at this abstract, this eloquent thing a moment ago, and it has a function here to get a new empty model. So if we have initialized this and passed it the classified add object or ORM model as its model, then it's going to hand us back a clean classified add when we call this routine. So we could do, in this space, instead of this huge insert statement, we could do repo get new and catch that. Okay, so we're going to save the result there, and then we could start saying classified title equals it's funny, these have capitals. I've never coded this way now. I'm not sure I actually wrote this, actually. I'm going to say I didn't write this, I inherited it from somebody. But I certainly wouldn't do it that way now. Anyway, we could continue to... I prefer to have the magic methods for underscore set, which are available in PHP. Yeah. So we could say, we could tell it to save here. That's one option. Or we might go back to our repo and say repo save classified. So either way, the code is going to be much cleaner like this. None of these MySQL query things in here. And much more readable, I think. Okay. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do on this file, and I'm not done with it, but that's really it for presentation type stuff here. We could sit here and go through all of this, but I'm sure you don't want to. This is the code that we all hate, right? So, any questions? All right, thanks for coming. We got more pizza. So if anybody's, some of you got in late.